Hi, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Education Matters. It's Tuesday night. It's 6 o'clock. If you're watching live, or if it's Tuesday night at 6 o'clock, then you are watching live. And welcome to another episode of Summary Education Matters. Although the weather tonight is a little off with thunderstorms, etc. So once again, welcome to this particular show. As usual, the city of Manchester never ceases to throw up things. For such a small city, it's amazing how much political action goes on here in any given week, and this is meant to be the slow period, right, when the schools are out and there's some things going on. And I see the kids playing. Fun in the Sun is on in full flight right now, every day, and that's what I think about at summertime. And also, there are not a lot of meetings going on in the city, right? So most of the boards are on a small hiatus, a little holiday here. It is going to be exciting coming up because we're heading into elections. Every second year is an election year, and the 2-year term of the members of the board, mayor and alderman, and the members of the school board are coming to an end in November. Well, actually, the elections are in November, and the new bodies, the new candidates, no, they're not candidates anymore once they're elected. Those newly elected would take up their positions in January. But once we're in full election mode, I guess, right now. There is the special election for the Senate seat between Mr. Booton and Kevin Kavanagh. That will be coming up. I think it's on the 25th or the 27th of July. And so the mailboxes, we're starting to see some of that literature coming in, which is a precursor to what we're going to see in a few weeks. I've reached out, by the way, to just today. I reached out to all the members of the school board in the city of Manchester, and I will be reaching out to all the candidates for school board in the city of Manchester too, to invite them on to come and talk with us here on this show on a Tuesday evening. By the way, you're welcome to call in here anytime. The call-in number is 640-3091, and if you'd like to discuss any of the hot topics that are going on in the city right now, I'd be happy to accept your call. But I have reached out to the current board members. I haven't heard of anybody who's not rerunning for their seat. So we'll see. Maybe that will change. But as of what I know right now, the all incumbents are running. And so I've reached out to them and invited them to come join us in the months to come, so that in all there are 14 school board members and 14 aldermen. So that's 28. You think about it, that's 6 months worth of shows right there at one a show if they were all to come on. I know some of them will not. But any of those who happen to be listening to this, you should have gotten an email from me if you're a current school board member. If you're running for school board and you haven't heard from me yet, please reach out to me. I'd be happy to have you on here anytime. I am a great believer in public discourse. It's probably, that shouldn't be surprising to you since I'm sitting here doing this. I believe in everybody. The more people who have a say in these things, the better. I do, with a caveat though. It bothers me a lot. I don't expect there's anything can be done about it, but it bothers me a lot when people talk from a place of ignorance, and that's kind of a sharp term. And but it just, some people don't have the timidity to stop and inquire before, pushing forward with an opinion based on ill-informed views or views that are not informed at all. And particularly those people who come at things from an ideological base, they seem to be incapable of penetration by logic and reason. I'm sure to an extent it's true of all of us. Like anybody watching this show, I think we probably have biases. Some of them it's easier to deal with the ones that we know. We probably have some that we don't know, and that makes it more difficult. But then that's the whole point of conversing. Otherwise, if there was no possibility of enlightening others or of being enlightened oneself, then we should just I should probably switch off this mic now, turn off the lights, and just leave, because it wouldn't make any sense. Like they say in Ireland, it would be like having a lighthouse in the middle of a bog, brilliant but useless. So I don't want to be a lighthouse in a bog. So I continue the discourse, because the conversation, because I think that information does matter, just like education matters, and giving people information is educating them. So. So in that light, over the coming weeks, as we go on, I'm hoping to bring you as many candidates as are willing to come on our show, and we'll talk with them, and some we'll agree with more than others. I don't think there's a single candidate for school board in the city of Manchester that I would agree with 100%. There's one or two that I would come close to disagreeing with 100% of the time, but that's not true. And it's not like, ladies and gentlemen, that being falsely collegial is or being false or not being true to oneself is what I'm trying to seek here. But the truth of the matter is that if some of the rhetoric were toned down a little bit, and if people stopped, prancing in front of cameras or, preening themselves, they might come to understand that there's a lot of commonality. Now, as time has progressed here, I think that the divergence of opinions in the United States more generally, and in issues around education, have become more sharp. So there's no denying that there are very divergent views, very different views, but there's still a lot of commonality. And then the false accusations against others. I hear people on the right, calling progressives or liberals, whatever we want to call people, calling them derogatory terms like, communists and socialists, as though that particularly was a particularly derogatory term. But even rotten words like libtard, and then on the other side, people referring to conservatives and Republicans as Republicans and repugs and all this. It's actually repugnant, the whole thing, because I don't think people who indulge in those conversations are actually moving the conversation forward very much at all. I think it's good to have cut and thrust. It's good to have arguments and discussions, even ones that become a little loud and where people are forceful in their views. I think that's all healthy. I think I was going to say it makes good entertainment. It may do that too. But I think in order to to have fire, things combust, and there's heat from fire, and sometimes we require that. So it's not as though I'm trying to, or I would suggest that we be gentlemanly or gentlewomanly in our tone or something. But let's try and get to let's have discussions that are purposeful, that sort of move us along here in our view of things. And sadly, those are not the people that we are surrounding ourselves with right now. We look at the state level. We have Mr. Edelblut as the Secretary for Education, who is a pretty ideological person who has no experience of schools. He has I think 7 children, and he has homeschooled them, and bully for him. I'm sure he's a nice man and makes a lovely neighbour to whoever he lives next to, and he may be a very pleasant person. I don't happen to know him. I'm not questioning any of those things. I'm saying that he knows nothing about education in the state of New Hampshire, or even more broadly. And so, and that combined with the fact that he has already an ideological position that makes it difficult then to listen to his his pronouncements from on high that are not based on some facts. And I was on social media today looking at something, and a lady who was well known in New Hampshire circles for offering very, very, very right wing opinions on education, and she's and yet I happened to see her today on a website that had to do nothing with education. She purports to be sort of Miss Education for New Hampshire, and she's on rabidly talking she very much in support of the Trump administration and attacking previous President Obama and Hillary Clinton, and like attacking people. And so now I'm like, well, there you are, right? This lady who purports to be dispassionate and sort of just giving us the facts about education. Always, of course, those facts are anti-public education. I mean, she's simply somebody who is, hook, line, and sinker committed to tearing down the public education system. And as I've said on this show many times, and what I want people to be aware of is that the nature of the conversation today. We've got to take into account that there are some people sitting in the room who do not believe in the basic right of every United States child, or every child in the United States, to have a free and adequate public education. And that's a terrible state of affairs, but that's where we find ourselves. As schools are out, ladies and gentlemen, there are people, there are kids in the city of Manchester, many of them. And when you think about this image, please don't think about immigrants and people of color or of different races, or particularly or people who are refugees, because what I'm going to talk about doesn't necessarily involve. They don't have to be any of those things. There are more people who are native to the United States and are not immigrants or refugees. And the programs I'm going to talk about are the free lunch programs and food programs that exist in the city of Manchester for the many, many, many hundreds, perhaps thousands of kids in the city of Manchester who don't have enough food every day. And they rely upon the school system for that sustenance. And in the absence of that, and you can go to a number of centres in Manchester on any day for the summer, and there are food trucks there and food set out, and you will see hundreds and hundreds of people there being fed. And it's an extraordinary thing. And you see it in the summertime. You don't see it for the rest of the year, because for the rest of the year, that is actually happening within the schools. And we can debate about why that is all so and everything, but that's just a reality of food insecurity in the United States. And I don't want to get off on topics around food stamps, etc. But clearly there is poverty in our country and in our state. And remember, we live in the 6th or 7th richest state in the union. But I guess most people should know that those programs do exist, and if anybody is in need of those services do exist. And they exist, ladies and gentlemen, not provided for by the state of New Hampshire, which is very poor in its support of all these such programs, but is provided by donations and charities and outside agencies. I was talking on a show just a minute ago about. We're talking about the state of things in the city and how we have the least well-funded school system in the state of New Hampshire, and we have the highest number of pupils per teacher in the state of New Hampshire, and the fact that we just do a terrible job in the state of New Hampshire. We like to sit back and talk about live free or die and the New Hampshire advantage, and it actually none of it bears scrutiny. In actual fact, because we have young people leaving the state because they once they graduate they're out of here. The state of New Hampshire has the privilege and honor of having the students who go to school in the state of New Hampshire have the highest level of college debt of any students in any state in the United States. We have the least well-funded university system of any university system in the United States. I mean, these things are just unconscionable in the end. And there was an example from today had to do with another issue, but I think it illustrates the point of how things are here. There was a story in the Union Leader today or yesterday about a young man who's 21 or 22 with autism who spent 28 days in an emergency room, in a cubicle or a room in an emergency room in a hospital in New Hampshire. 28 days. Can you imagine if that was your son or daughter? And what was wrong with him? What's wrong with him? But he has autism, and so he was becoming disruptive at home. He was out in the street and he was throwing some things at some kids walking by or something, and the parents called the police because they didn't know what else to do with him. And the police, what could the police do? They had no place to take him other than bring him to the local emergency room. And there he sat for 28, let me repeat, 28 days. Ladies and gentlemen, who would you do that to? You wouldn't put your dog in a room for 28 days and not let him out in the fresh air. Why would you put a 21-year-old or 22-year-old young man in need of medical or of mental health services? And the answer from the state of New Hampshire is we put him in an emergency room and leave him there for 28 days. And the parents of that young man, according to them on today's article, they wrote to and contacted the state members of the state senate, the executive board, the governor, and to every other authority that they could think of, and all to no avail. And eventually, on the 29th day, a place was found for him by a private agency. A place was found for him in a place in Massachusetts, and so he was accepted in Massachusetts. Now, I got to tell you something, ladies and gentlemen. When we've got a city in the state of Manchester today, we have issues in Manchester, and we refuse to override the tax cap. And you may see stories about some extra money was found, and it's still all cobbled together. We still had our tax cap number of whatever is 1.6% or 1.06%, whatever it was, and that's where it's going to stay. The previous year, we actually gave money back to the taxpayers of Manchester. There may even be money go back to the taxpayers of Manchester this year, even if it's only pennies. In the city of Manchester, we have, I'll say it again, the least well-funded school system in the state of New Hampshire on a per capita basis. We also have the highest number of kids per teacher of any school district in all of New Hampshire. And the response of the politicians in charge of this city to that issue, where we've reached that point, the worst in the state, our kids. What our response to that is, even after all the cobbling around, and people would say, some of our politicians would like to get, claps on the back from me and congratulations from us and from me and from others, because they managed to veto the mayor's extraordinarily poor budget and cobble together some extra funds, and therefore we didn't get rid of as many teachers as we thought we would. And we're meant to take that as success. The bottom line, ladies and gentlemen, best as we know today, with all the pluses and minuses, in the city of Manchester, the city that already has the most kids per classroom of any city in the state of New Hampshire, or any town for that matter, anywhere in the state of New Hampshire, our response is there will be 14 less adults, teachers, not just anybody, but teachers. There will be 14 less teachers in the schools of Manchester on September 1st than there was in the schools of Manchester on June 1st. So we have 22 schools, that's a half a teacher a school is what we're eliminating. And we're meant to be pleased with that. This compromise worked, and the mayor's veto was overridden, and we managed to stay within this 1.6% or whatever it is. It is a nonsense. It is nonsensical. It is inexcusable. And the things we're doing to kids and the effect that it actually has on them, a bright light should be shone upon what is actually happening within our schools. Because in the end, I've said it many times, that top 20% or whatever that number is, who've got supportive parents, a stable family home, encouraging environment, they live in a life that's like a petri dish for growth and development, etc. And so they thrive, and they'll thrive anywhere. They'll thrive at some private academy. They'll thrive at some private school. They'll thrive wherever they are. We have those kids. It's the kids below that we should worry about. And the kids that we are leaving behind, ladies and gentlemen, it is unconscionable that we're doing this to another generation of kids, particularly here in Manchester. But you could make the argument across the state, because the state refuses to recognise these difficulties and to do anything about it. And I have to tell you, to my friends who would support the last budget that was passed pretty much on a party line vote in the state of New Hampshire. Under that budget, $600 million on the biennium, $300 million per year, when fully implemented, is going back into the reduction in business taxes. And I have to tell you, there's not a business that I know of, or a business leader that I know of, who is looking for a reduction in the business taxes in the state of New Hampshire. Now, let me say, of course, we'd all like to pay less taxes. But, the GE plant in Hooksett, they'll be delighted with the free money they're being given by the taxpayers of New Hampshire. I'm sure they'll accept it. I'm sure Walmart at their supercenter, or the Walton family down in Arkansas, I think they'll be delighted with the extra money they get. To buy another holiday home in the Cayman Islands, or to invest in whatever they're investing in next, and they'll be delighted with the extra dollars they get from the state of New Hampshire. I think companies up and down the state will be thrilled with the money that they're being given by the leadership in the state of New Hampshire. I don't frankly think one job will be created as a result of it, but yet we cannot afford to fund the building of schools, the expansion of schools, the improvement of schools. We can't afford to fund innovation. We can't afford all these things. We've decided we can't afford. And our governor, Chris Sununu, has got the gall, when quoted on this article today, to give a non-answer in response to the young man who spent 28 days in in an emergency room because of his autism issues. I think it's outrageous. I don't understand how people accept it. I think they accept it because they have these sort of false images of where we are. And I guess if you're doing okay and life's not too bad for you and you've got a reasonable job, and you've got company health care, and if your kids are healthy, and you've the good fortune to be in a stable marriage with a nice wife or husband, and life is half good to you, I think you're probably excused from not knowing that there are people who for whom life's not so simple. And we can only all hope that good fortune will continue to shine upon you. But I've met many people over time who, when they first are faced with some adversity, they switch from their apathy and acquiescence to where we are, to all of a sudden being amazed at how things are. I have a friend. I don't want. That's probably too recognizable, so I won't go down that path. But I just think it is not correct what we do, and particularly what we're doing here in the city of Manchester to our schools and our school children. We're going to be wrapped up in the issue of redistricting once we get back into the fall. And let me be clear: I'm very much in favour of redistricting, and I'm in favour of tearing off the Band-Aid in that regard too. That I don't have a lot of sympathy for the NIMBY thing, the not in my backyard. I think you're always going to, if you're going to redistrict, there will be people who will be upset. Some of them might be very upset, depending on how extensive the redistricting is. But in the end, if you do it based on logic, then great. We redistrict and move on from there. But let's be clear, ladies and gentlemen. The fact that we have, whatever the number is, I think it's 25 kids per teacher in the city of Manchester, which is the highest by far in the state of New Hampshire. And this is available from the state of New Hampshire's own website. If you go to the Department of Education, you can go in either PDF, Excel, or HTML format. You can get these numbers, and they're printed out on an annual basis, and they're annualized. And it's very easy to find this data. It's not like you have to plow through 50 pages of a website or something. They're right there on the Department of Education's website, and they're pretty easy to access, and you can go and find those for yourselves. So with this large number of kids, the 24 kids per teacher, which might sound reasonable to you, but that means with that number being the number, it means that there are some classes, of course, that have got 20 or 15, or we may have special education classes or kids with special needs who are 1-to-1 or 1-to-4 or whatever it is. So that means at the other end of the scale, we have hundreds and hundreds of classes at 30 plus kids per class, which is beyond where the state says is even allowable, beyond the worst case scenario. But the issue about redistricting is that we're going to chase our tails on redistricting for months and months and months, because we always chase the latest shiny object in the city of Manchester. Remember that no matter how you redistrict, you can move it around any way you want, and importantly, I'm saying I support that. I think it's good that we do redistricting, but when we're all done, we won't have added one single teacher in the city of Manchester, and we won't have reduced one single child. So what we will have is better distribution. The overcrowding in a school like Northwest should be alleviated because it will be spread across a larger number of schools. But the overcrowding of class after class after class with 30 kids in a class, that's not going to be resolved by redistricting. And so we can, I think it's important we do it, but don't be conned by people. I saw one gentleman who was running for school board tied two things together. He said that he was looking forward to, or he supported redistricting because it would help to alleviate the pupil-teacher ratio issue in the city of Manchester. And that's a non sequitur. It's an illogical connection. There is no logic between the two. If you've got 500 kids and 5 teachers, the ratio is 100 kids to teachers. And whichever way you divide them up across different schools, you still have 5 teachers and 100 kids. In the ideal scenario, you'd have 100, 100, 100, 100, 100, so you'd have 5 100s, and that would be the best possible scenario. So in the case in Manchester, it's obviously not as egregious as 1 per 100, but what you'll have is a better distribution of teachers and students so that it will ameliorate some of the worst problems. But it will do nothing to move Manchester from having the worst by quite a bit, not by a small percentage, the worst numbers in the state of New Hampshire for children per teacher. So that's where we are, and the inability to have discussions on these topics is very frustrating, ladies and gentlemen, when we have both. There are aldermen, men and women, who are aldermen in this city who do not know the basic truth of what is happening in our schools. I mean, it's not that they're not smart people, at least some of them, but they just don't get it. They don't understand it. They're always going after the latest shiny object and getting off down rabbit warrens, chasing ideas, instead of staying with the big topic. I think if you I know it's a mantra and I know people get tired of it, but I stick with the basic numbers at the top end, because they're inexcusable and they're undeniable. And then I let all the people, and we could name them all, who obfuscate and want to talk about all kinds of other policies in our schools, and the pizza policy and the lice policy and the bed bug policy and the bottles of water in the classroom policy and the parental notification policy, and they love talking policies all day long. They never want to talk about putting one more teacher in a classroom so that your kids or mine have a better educational opportunity. I'm not saying that all these policies are not important and should never be dealt with, but they're all red herrings, every one of them, in the face of the place that this district has found itself in. And at the top of that pyramid, at the very apex of it, is of course our mayor, Ted Gatsas, who sits atop this mess and insists that everything's fine here, don't look here, nothing to see, folks, move along, we're all fine, don't worry about it, steady as she goes, we're doing fine. Because if the chief at some case, right, the buck stops here, and in the city of Manchester, the buck stops in the corner office. And in the case of Mayor Gatsas, he really has no place to hide, because he's now finishing his 4th term. He spent 8 years in that office. His fingerprints are all over the school district. And so if you were to do a measure of where we were the day he became mayor, and by the way, the problem doesn't start there, right? Because we can go back to when Mayor Gatsas had his hands all over the budgeting in the city of Manchester and claimed that he could do it better than everybody else. And when the school board or the board of mayor and aldermen passed budgets which were created by Mayor Gatsas before he was mayor, we could go back and say that his fingerprints are all over the city financially for a period, under the Ginta administration and even before. But let's just stick with the 8 years that he's been mayor. And now if we were to take some measure of where we've gotten to when it comes to schools and the things that have gone on while he's been mayor, and the figures are out there. You couldn't be, I don't mean to be pejorative, but the figures are out there. You can be too lazy to look. You can choose not to look because you prefer not to see. You could pretend the king has clothes from the story The King Hath No Clothes. Or you can just look and see what the set of facts are. And it may not suit those who have opinions around thinking that, we've done a good job and etc. I think we've done a lousy job. Because there's one thing, we talk about the actual facts of what has happened. If we do a comparative analysis, in other words, if we were to look at what all the other school districts have done and compare that to Manchester, then it becomes really egregious. Because we have moved over time. The city of Manchester has moved downward on all these metrics around class sizes, expenditure per pupil, etc. Our numbers are heading in the so at very least every other district in the state of New Hampshire has found a way of doing it better. Now, if people love to talk about private enterprise and how private enterprise might handle it. Let me tell you something. If you were IBM Global Services and you had offices in 25 states, well, the CEO of IBM Global Services in the state that's doing the least well, that has the least amount of profit, that pays its employees less than everybody else, and is losing business faster than its competitors, that CEO of that division would probably get eliminated. It could be an easy decision for any board of directors. They would look at it and say, you're not kind of the worst, you're not approaching worst, it's not like you're slipping and we'd like to see you try and catch up here. Those trains have left the station a long time ago, folks. We are the worst. And if Mayor Gatsas is a big, strong man with a loud voice that he likes to use, and if the shoe were on the other foot, he'd be shouting it from the hilltops. And all the prevarication and the sidestepping and the bluster would all be pushed to one side, because we'd get a metaphorical finger in the chest, and you'd be pointed at and told, under your watch, you eliminated the contributing towns, and they've taken their talent, their kids, and their money, and they're spending it at Londonderry and Pinkerton. That's what you did. Under your watch, the city of Manchester has gone from having the 12th lowest or 10th lowest per student expenditure in the state of New Hampshire to having the lowest student expenditure in the state of New Hampshire. We've gone from having the 14th highest number of kids per teacher to having the highest number of kids per teacher. That's what's happened on your watch. And you can go on about, you can blame and point fingers, and I hear I hear a classic one. I can picture some friends of mine, and the defense is usually, well, Mayor Gatsas, didn't do all of that on his own. No, I know that. I mean, he likes to take credit for the things that went well on his own, and then won't accept the responsibility for the things that haven't gone well. The problem with the things that haven't gone well, ladies and gentlemen, is it isn't just that they haven't gone well and the mayor's done nothing about it. That would be a cause, that would be a reason for termination in itself. But I propose to you that the actions taken by the mayor have actually caused many of these problems to exist. Let me see, we have an incoming call and see who we have. Go ahead, caller, you're on Education Matters.
Hey, Jim. One other thing that failed to mention about under Mayor Gatsis, we went from high school students required to have 22 credits down to 20 credits.
Right.
So when you talk about cutting and doing things on the cheap, right now Manchester students they can graduate with 4 credits less than Pinkerton, 3 credits less than Bedford. Now, if you take it in terms of courses, that's 4 full-year courses less than Pinkerton, or 3 full-year courses than Bedford. So when you really talk about doing things on the cheap, Manchester, under Gatsis's watch, has cut from 22 credits to 20 credits and allowed students to actually graduate much faster than any of the surrounding towns.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. Let me ask you one other question with regard to the
Sure.
to the hours calendar and the reduction in number of school days in the city of Manchester. Under Mayor Gatsis, the schools now kids are in school for whatever that is, 5 days less per year. I know that's something that's of concern to Dr. Vargas. What's your take on that?
Well, I think it's a wash. I think if you take a look, as far as the hours, Manchester kids, as far as say high school, they put in a half hour, longer than any other school around.
Okay.
A lot of school districts, what they've done, because they went over their 5 allotted school snow days, they went into a longer school day so that they could make up those lost days.
Okay.
So it's actually just a wash.
Okay.
It is.
All right. Fair enough. I appreciate it. Thank you for the call.
All right, Jim.
All right.
All right.
All the best. Bye-bye. So there we have it. Another one, of a place where, in the end, it's a tamping back across the board. And so my point was just before the call was that it's one thing, that this has happened under Mayor Gatsis's watch. I contend that it has been caused by him. I have to tell you that when it comes to the elimination of the surrounding towns and the millions, perhaps tens of millions of dollars that are now going elsewhere that should be coming to the city of Manchester or used to for the last 150 years, single-handedly almost, Mayor Gatsis with his abruptness and rudeness to the surrounding towns and his my way or the highway attitude caused the severing of more than 100-year-long community connections. And ladies and gentlemen, be very clear, that's a lot more than just simply an educational and academic thing. The cut that happened, the severance of the connection between Hooksett and Manchester and Candia and Manchester and Auburn and Manchester is not just for the school district. It means that kids don't play on the same teams. It means they don't get together and hang out in each other's backyards anymore. It means that the gap between Hooksett and Manchester is wider now than it's ever been in the last 150, 160 years. And that in the long term will have as big an effect or a bigger effect than any of the than the budget issues in the city of Manchester around its schools. And that lies squarely at the feet of Mayor Gatsis. I have to tell you that there's a lot of blame to go around when it comes to getting our schools into the mess that we've managed to get them into. But there's clearly in my mind, and I'll be saying this, and if Mayor Gatsis is unsuccessful in his bid for a 5th term to give us now a full 10 years benefit of his leadership or lack thereof, even long after he's gone, this is not about the individual Ted Gatsis. This has to do with his choices and the bad choices that he made early on. He decided to align himself with people who wanted to choke the public schools in Manchester and to ensure that they got as little money as they possibly could get away with giving them. He chose that earlier on. That's where his stance has been. He refuses to come off of it, and he has never led. I talked a long time ago at City Hall, 6, 7 years ago. I gave a little talk just on my issue was about leadership. And in the end, leaders are needed to lead. And the mayor has shown no leadership. He hasn't had the courage to face down the people on his own side of the house, and he has been incapable of being forthright with the people of Manchester and explaining to them exactly where they are and where things are and how they should be different. You know, there was a report came out just recently, this week, and a national report on national income. Do you know that in the United States last year that the average income for an American worker went up by 2.8%? Now, we happen to live in the sixth or seventh richest state in the union in terms of per capita income. So it's likely, though I don't have the empirical evidence for it, it's likely that incomes in New Hampshire went up higher than the national average. But the national average was 2.8%. So we have school districts and cities across the state of New Hampshire who increased spending this year by 2 and 3 and even 4%. But 2% was done everywhere. You know, I saw, and then if you go and you look at back in the springtime when the town hall meetings were being had at many of the smaller communities in the state of New Hampshire who are governed by town hall and by public meeting, and again and again, there you see democracy at work where people are making decisions, and you know somebody comes before them and says, you know, the school building is leaking, the roof is leaking, and it needs to be replaced, or our fire engine, you know, is on its last legs, we need to buy a new one. And invariably, these articles are passed by the public. In the end, the public wants their fire engine to actually roll down the road when they need it. The public actually wants their kids to go to a school where the heating system works. They want their kids to go to a school where they have a seat to sit on and a book to read. That's what the public wants. And by the way, shocker of shockers, ladies and gentlemen, the public's willing to pay for it. Contrary to the cheapskate, tight-wadded, already rich people at the top of the pyramid in the politics in Manchester, the members of the public are willing to pay for proper services. They don't want any wastefulness. They want us to be careful with the way money is managed, but the people are willing to pay for it. We got down to Derry 2 years ago, where a bunch of very conservative lawmakers were defunding the schools and fire service, and the people of Derry, you know, backed right up and said no, and they passed passed budgets to allow the cuts to be undone because they weren't going to let that happen. Now, in the city of Manchester, just this past few weeks, we've had the issue of the potential closure of a fire station on the south side because we didn't put enough money in the budget to keep it open. Ladies and gentlemen, for instance, in the city of Manchester, and I have to say I'm outside my area of comfort here because education is complicated enough and the funding issues there, but something that I know to be so is that the annual cost of street maintenance in the city of Manchester is $6 million. That's what it actually is. That's the professional number, the known number that as a community we need to spend $6 million per year in order that our streets won't deteriorate. You know, there's a point comes like a point of no return sort of. If you allow streets to deteriorate to a certain extent, then the number becomes much larger because they have to be completely renewed. And Kevin Shepherd or whoever it is, I forget who it is who manages this, has talked with great eloquence and erudition on this topic. And so it's $6 million per year. With Manchester, we funded at $4 million. And then we turn around last year and we borrow $6 million from our grandchildren in bond money. So we're borrowing money to tar roads and to pave roads because for the previous years under Mayor Gatsas and his budget, we have funded the streets at a level that is not adequate. We have bonded school books. We've borrowed money to buy school books, ladies and gentlemen, under Mayor Gatsas' budgets. We've borrowed money, bonded money to put locks on the schools under Mayor Gatsas. We've bonded money to buy phones so that there could be an adequate phone system which was required under the Department of Homeland Security so that schools could communicate internally if there was a threat. We bonded that money, borrowed it from our grandchildren. our school system will be paying off the $3 million school book loan in 8 years from now. And that's the legacy of having Mayor Gatsis in the corner office. I hate to be so, whatever, they might sound mean or something, but let's call a spade a spade. Those are all truths. That's just where it is. And I know that in a different political reality, if there were no tax cap, Mayor Gatsis would probably have had a budget of, let's say this year it might have been 3%. And he would have defended it against a number like saying, incomes have gone up in the state by 2.8%, so I'm passing a budget of 2.5. And we would have eliminated no teachers, and we would have had money for the fire station, and we would have had money but we refused to do it because we're cobbled by this ridiculous tax cap number that has us down in the weeds. With this artificial number. In the end, it's indefensible that the city of Manchester is doing to its schools what it's doing and that it continues to do it. And if anybody has any, by the way, Joyce Craig is running against Mayor Gatsis again for, as is, I know Jeff Cassell and Russ Ouellette will also be running as less well-known characters. Mr. Cassell is the gentleman who he considers himself the father of the tax cap, so he owns a lot of this, I guess, and he's very proud of that. But when Joyce Craig, when I see people talk about Joyce Craig and say, big spender Joyce Craig, what a load of nonsense. I have no reason to believe that a Mayor Craig will suddenly open the floodgates and that our schools will be awash in money. I wish it were so, but I know it won't be. So that's just another fallacy, a lie being told about somebody who at least might bring to the public some reality about where we actually stand and won't be listening to the fat cats who live outside the city of Manchester, will actually be listening to Manchester taxpayers. And perhaps when a bunch of people come to City Hall under a Mayor Craig will respond to the people in the room and will not be taking phone calls in the back office from her friends in high places who will insist that she look after them first. Let me go to another place before we come to, as we get through with not as much time left as I had hoped. We've had a number of things happen in the city in the last few weeks. On our show last week, we talked about the revelation that a young girl, a 15-year-old, I believe, was raped at West High School back now 2 years ago, and that when this happened, that it was kept secret by the mayor and others in the city of Manchester for 2 years. The mayor's story on this topic has changed two or three times, so it's hard to know what his stance is today. But the bottom line is the bottom line. A child was raped at West High School. It happened in the middle of the last mayoral election, and Mayor Gatsis notified nobody that had happened, and parents and teachers and administrators and others were kept in the dark on that topic, and that's inexcusable. The misinformation and the half-truths that came out once the revelation was made are inexcusable too. There's no reason not just to be you're caught with having done something wrong, then man up and just own up to it. Changing your story and saying it ain't so is not good enough. In order to believe what the mayor tells us about he didn't know, it means you'd have to consider that Assistant Superintendent Dave Ryan was lying when he said what he said, that Chief Willard was lying when he said what he said. When the notice came in that there was a potential large lawsuit about to happen against the city because of an incident at West High School, you'd have to believe that the mayor never inquired about that. So frankly, it's just not believable. So I made the point earlier today on another show that I was talking on that I think it's, first of all, I want to say that our first thought should be with the young lady who suffered this traumatic experience. The other thing is that it's important to note that these terrible things can happen in the best of schools at the best of times. You go up to Pembroke Academy right now is dealing, I think it's Pembroke Academy, isn't it? Is the one that's dealing with shocking revelations around continued sexual abuse of young girls there. So this is something that has happened, that can happen to anywhere. And so it's important, I think, not to pile on Mayor Gatsas because this, he happens to be the mayor, and ultimately the buck stops with him. But the culprit here is the young man who raped the 15-year-old girl. But what is culpable on behalf of the mayor is there are two things. One is the fact that it was covered up for 2 years and then lied about, or not spoken forthrightly about. That's clearly the issue. But also when Bedford left West High School, and West High School was left as a shadow of the school it once was, one branch alive on a dying tree. School board after school board after school board after school board has refused to face that issue and to actually bring closure to that, or fix the problem. And all the talk about opening an academy there, an Academy of Math and Science, an Academy of Music and Arts, or whatever the other solutions might have been, nobody on our school boards over the last 10 years has taken any action. And oh, by the way, Mayor Gatsas was there for all of it. And so the fact that there was a corridor, and at least one, if not more, places at West High School where kids were allowed to indulge in illegal activity around smoking dope and cigarettes and cutting classes, that was allowed to happen, and people took no action against it. That's inexcusable, and the buck stops with the mayor. He is the chairman of the school board after all, and the buck stops with him. And while they were talking about, pizzas and trying to privatize the food service in the city and trying to privatize as much else as they can, and making, whatever else they were doing, and all the other navel gazing that went on and introspection, they should have been looking after job number one, which was the safety and well-being of the children of the city of Manchester and their adequate education. And they've been looking after neither, in actual fact. So, and then we have that whole piece of news, ladies and gentlemen, gets almost pushed to one side, as serious as that is, and the millions it's likely to cost this city, gets pushed aside when we find out, and we have the revelation now that the city solicitor and the city attorney are both, one has effectively gone already, one will be gone for the 1st of August, Tom Clark and Tom Arnold. And so the city solicitor's office is decimated, perhaps more than decimated. Decimate literally means one divided in tenths. And this is happening because the Attorney General of New Hampshire was notified by the Manchester Police Department that there was a problem with prosecuting cases of domestic abuse and sexual violence against women and partners in the city of Manchester. And this went on, and letters went back and forth. This happened in City Hall while the mayor's in one office and the city solicitor's in another. There are claims of incompetence. There are claims of pleading out cases that shouldn't have been, or cases where cases were dropped and not proceeded with where they should have. It's a mess, ladies and gentlemen. And this also happened on Mayor Gatsas's watch. So, I think the wheels are coming off of the Mayor Gatsas political machine and administration. I think his numbers up. I think he has done what he was able to do for the city of Manchester. I don't see it tenable for him to have a position moving forward. I don't think he's part of the solution. I think he should do the honourable thing and step aside. I don't mean today, but that will be up to him. But I'm talking about at the end of his current term, that he's done whatever he can do. There's no reason to believe that in some moment of great inward vision that Ted Gatsas is going to come rolling out of his corner on the first day of his fifth term, and all of a sudden have solutions that he'd never had for the preceding 8, 10, 12, or 16 or 20 years in public service. He's done what he's done. He's shot his bolt. There are places where he deserves some credit. As far as education is concerned, he deserves none. He has brought this school district to its knees, and as a result has affected the property values of every man, woman and child who owns property in the city of Manchester. He has brought Manchester from being called the best place to live a number of times in the United States to a place where people actively avoid. And all of this has been done based on political expediency and ideology that doesn't allow him to us to have the school system that we deserve. So I don't see how he overcomes this. I mean, America's a strange place today, so all kinds of people seem to be able to get elected. So maybe it's not impossible that he can be re-elected. Frankly, I think the evidence shows that he doesn't deserve to be re-elected. I don't think he's shown any of the leadership needed. I know of no ideas that he has for the future. I mean, there's political trickery and sharp-handedness, etc., that goes on, and half-truths and mistruths and etc. I don't see any real proposals to move this city forward, and so I'll be despairing if Mayor Gatsas happens to be in charge of our school district and the future of our school district. I think especially that we have Dr. Vargas in charge, and well, Dr. Vargas may end up being somebody who will do things that I might not agree with at all, and there may come a time when I'll be amazed that I ever supported Dr. Vargas. But he is a new man in town. He has shown some political courage. He has shown business acumen and some political nous that would lead me to believe, and some courage that would lead me to believe that he has at least the capacity to make wise decisions or bold decisions that may be part of the solution for Manchester. So I think he can be part of the future in Manchester. I think a lot of people on the school board need to re-examine their positions and whether they're there for just their own health care, which is an issue I want to go back to, because I hear more and more and more that the health care issue and the money being spent on health care for our board of school members and our aldermen is inordinately high. And it's something that I'll be visiting in the weeks to come when I really would like to see the numbers that we're spending, the actual numbers that are being spent on behalf, because it seems to me that there's a story there. Ladies and gentlemen, we come to the end of another program here tonight. I would ask you to think upon these matters. We'll be talking again next week as more exciting things, I'm sure, happen in the city of Manchester. Thank you for your time this evening. Have a great week, and we'll see you all on next Tuesday. Good night, and thank you.